It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, and those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, our digital audience with us tonight. They'll be popping up on your screen. There you go. Among them, our guests as well. So looking forward to their questions for our guests in a short while. The 2024 budget speech. Debt service costs will peak at a share of revenue in 2025-2026 and decline thereafter. The consolidated budget deficit is projected to narrow from 4.9% of GDP in 2023-2024 to 3.3% by the end of the 2024 medium-term expenditure framework period. And breathe, right? Confused yet? I know I was. Tonight's mission, breaking down the budget into bite-sized pieces, the best way we can. But what about the two-part retirement system? It's peaked interest, takes effect in September, allowing more frequent access to a portion of your retirement savings. Is it a good idea? To what extent will the system ease the financial burdens? We will discuss. Also, this reserve account that many people are talking about of late, the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account. What do we know about it? What are the short-term benefits? What are the potential long-term fiscal risks? Stay tuned to find out why this matters. Which leads us to the question of the week. And we're asking you, what do you think of Treasury's plan to withdraw 150 billion from the country's contingency reserves in order to service rising debt? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Come, let's walk and talk. I want to get you some context with regards to all these various aspects that we want to talk about. The last budget of the 6th Democratic administration, was it balanced? Did it give you hope? Is it worth dipping into the reserves, the contingency reserves? Share with us your thoughts at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right, let's get you some context now. And as always, we turn to the magic wall, what we know and why it matters. I want to take a look at some of the headlines, so to speak, from the budget, right? So no changes with regards to VAT, no increase to the general fuel levy for 2024-2025. And we also heard the minister say that the revenue is mostly raised through personal income tax, right? By not adjusting the tax bracket, rebates and medical tax credit for inflation. What about the decision taken to introduce a reform of the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account? I mentioned it at the top. That stands out. I want to dig a little deeper with regards to that. It's pretty topical, right? Well, basically, it's an account held at the Reserve Bank that captures gains and losses on the country's foreign currency reserve transactions. What am I talking about? Well, simply put, as explained during the budget speech, if the rand strengthens, right, against the US dollar and the other reserve currencies, the account balance declines and vice versa. We're told that the account balance has grown now. So over 500 billion rand over the years. Why? Because the rand has depreciated over time. Make sense? Right? Now there's a withdrawal basically, of 150 billion rand in this reserve accounts balance. Is it a good idea to tap into this account? We've got the better minds on the program. Let's see. But this is some of the opinions that we've received so far in terms of the pros and cons of using this reserve account. According to a write-up in the SA Financial Markets Journal, the positives, take a look. Short-term fiscal relief used to alleviate fiscal imbalances can be used to prevent defaults on foreign loans. This is generally, right? It assists the government to meet its immediate financial obligations. What about the negatives? On the other hand, can cause inflationary pressure, could result in additional costs if government needs to borrow more, right? Depleting reserves, what does that mean? It means reducing cushion for future shocks and it can also affect market and investor confidence. We will explain how in a short while. We will test this, some of the pros and cons, with our guests tonight. Now to the two-part retirement system. People are talking about it. Why? Because what is the aim of this? It's to strike a balance between preserving contributions to safeguard a better retirement for you, while addressing the plight of the people to access some of their retirement funds, to help ease the financial burdens in times of distress, hard times. We're all going through it. Again, as heard during the 2024 budget speech, right? So how does it work exactly? Well, according to the finance minister, contributions to the retirement funds will be split. 1/3 goes to the savings component, that's what it's called, and 2/3 to something called the retirement component. So from the 1st of September this year, the first cash withdrawals could be made from the savings pot. Again, I will flesh this out a bit more with our guests in a short while. So that, in a nutshell, give or take, was some of the highlights of the budget speech. We will discuss further shortly. Now, I want to get your take with regards to what you heard on Wednesday. Word on the Street feature took to various streets of Soweto and Parkhurst in Johannesburg, seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic. And this is what you had to say.
From what I've read and heard, that it was a fairly balanced speech in the circumstances. So I think it had a little bit for everybody, a little bit for some people to complain about, and a little bit for some people to be optimistic about.
I am going to comment on the issue of the 350 grant that was not mentioned. It's a bit of a problem for us that it was not increased because we depend on it, as there is a big problem of not finding jobs.
Naturally, I wish that taxes would have been adjusted according to inflation. It means that we are paying more, we're all stretched with the cost of living, but it is a good thing that social grant spending has been increased.
We have a problem about isn't this kupugile. We
have a problem of taxes that were increased, like in alcohol and cigarettes. We can't afford cigarettes now and we still want to continue smoking, and this will affect business.
When it comes to alcohol, when it comes to increasing the price, looking to businesses and stuff, some people, they do make money with alcohol and cigarettes. So I think that one is gonna favor the side of business guys, and I don't think it's gonna affect anyone because it's not a compulsory thing.
I do know that a lot of people in South Africa are struggling, and it would be good to see some economic growth, jobs, job creation, and help for small businesses.
All right, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. It really helps in order to gauge the temperature of views on the ground, shapes the strategy to better that we always talk about. Let's get straight into it. We lined up a number of guests, a number of experts in the field. The divine knows that we need all the help we can get, right? Especially me. I still use my fingers to calculate the tip, the 10% tip when I go to the restaurant. So I need these better minds to help me. We have Thokozile Madonko from the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at WITS, the economy researcher, that is her title. We've got Gerald Mwandiambira from Sugar Creek Wealth CEO, and also Isaac Machejo, the Nedbank Country Risk and Foreign Debt Analyst. Guests, thank you very much indeed for your time. Digital audience also with us. You're also welcome to put up your hands, get some questions for our guests. We all need to work this out to understand how this budget will or will not change our lives going forward. Important. Isaac, I know you got some time constraints, so I want to start off with you with regards to this reserve account. Help us understand it in terms of tapping into this contingency reserves. Does the pros outweigh the cons?
Good evening, Helen. Definitely, it was about time that as a country we utilized this account, which has accumulated a massive balance that you mentioned of about 507 billion in January this year. We can just go back to 2003 when the National Treasury had to top up that account. But what has happened now is that over the past 20 years or so, a massive surplus has been built in that account. What's going to be very important is the rules to utilize that account, because the fear here is that we could see some profligacy, and instead of the government really implementing fundamental measures that will help to expand the tax base, there could be some reliance on this account to help to fill the borrowing gap.
I want to figure out in terms of how effective this would be. If the issue is that we have some structural issues, if that is the case, this short-term injection, this short-term release, what sort of impact would that make?
Remember that the main objective of tapping the contingency reserve gains is to basically reduce government borrowing and also limit the interest payments that the government already pays on its existing debt stock, which is, from the budget, it's close to 74% of the size of the economy, and that's quite significant. The National Treasury numbers show that the interest payments on the existing debt will absorb almost 20 cents of every R1 raised in taxes. So that's not a great situation. But I must mention this point that remember that these reserves are held in foreign currencies and gold that earn lower interest rates compared to the interest rates that the government pays on its existing debt. And importantly, the gold holdings, the South African Reserve Bank has been sitting on about 4 million ounces of gold for more than 20 years. And they're not earning interest. So, you've got an asset here that is not generating any cash flow. It is a contingency asset. And basically what's happening here is that National Treasury is finding a way of, generating some cash flow from these massive reserves.
Right. Isaac, break it down even further. Let's get to a basic understanding in terms of how exactly, on practical terms, these reserves will ease fiscal pressure.
Okay. The way it's going to happen, in very simple terms, over the next 3 years, the Reserve Bank is going to print 150 billion rands and credit the State Revenue Fund. And that will be the money that will go to the government, as we saw in the budget. And what the Reserve Bank is going to do is, on the reserves account, it is not going to sell any foreign exchange reserve, by the way, either gold or foreign currency, but it is just going to debit the government's reserves account in rand terms by the same amount. So that is basically new money injection.
So that will not compromise the solvency of the Reserve Bank, correct?
Not at all.
Okay, what about the exchange rate swings? How do you buffer against that?
Well, remember that the Reserve Bank, by injecting this liquidity, will take what we refer to as sterilization measures, i.e. To ensure that this new money that's pumped into the economy is not inflationary or does not cause inflation. The Reserve Bank will manage the injection of this liquidity, and if we can just ensure that it's not inflationary, then it will have a very little effect on the exchange rate.
Right. If we do say that robust reserves is a sign or one of the signs of a country's economic strength, and you are taking out, what does that do in terms of investor confidence?
Well, we must start by making it quite clear that our foreign exchange reserves, by many measures, are lower than where they should be, i.e. compared to our peer economies, the likes of Brazil, South Korea. That is the reason the government or the Reserve Bank will not liquidate any foreign exchange reserves, but basically create local currency, local liquidity backed by the value of the foreign exchange reserves. Now, how are we going to boost our foreign exchange reserves in South Africa? We need to boost the capacity of the local economy to generate foreign currency. So we need to get exports going, expanding, and we will earn foreign currency in that way and build up our stock of FX reserves.
Right. Gerald, let me bring you into the conversation. Agree, disagree, why?
Look, I agree in general that as with any fiscal decision, the main component which would support it is fiscal discipline. And as long as the Finance Ministry and Treasury use this liquidity in the right manner, then obviously we can create that external activity which will bring in forex. Now, the challenge is if that money is used, for example, to support grant payments, that's just consumption spending. It is not going to benefit the economy in any way, and actually would make it difficult to replace those reserves. So I would question and say, look, as long as the government is committed to fiscal discipline, we should be fine.
Thokozile, your take?
I think it was an elegant solution on the part of National Treasury and the Reserve Bank and government to tap into GFECRA. But remember, GFECRA is just one part of the overall government's balance sheet. And we actually have a relatively healthy, strong balance sheet. We can look at the government employees pension fund, we can look at UIF. So we have pots of money that we can access in times of crisis. The big question, though, and I caution my colleague about saying that pumping money into grants doesn't promote growth. It can. That is an investment. We need to be thinking about, are we channeling absolutely these resources into the right areas to build our economy, to inject growth? And we would argue that we're not seeing enough investment in the state to be able to drive growth. So we've had a bit of a bailout in terms of dealing with our debt structure, which we needed to, absolutely. And we're not facing a fiscal crisis anytime soon. We have, really good, strong books, which we can be very proud of. The other thing that we must really commend both the Reserve Bank and National Treasury was to bring this move of GFECRA, tapping into GFECRA, to Parliament. So it is going to be overseen by Parliament. It's an active Parliament that's happening. Right. And that kind of transparency is exactly what we need when we're talking about the budget. We need to know where the rands and cents are going. And so here we have a new pool of money that we can now monitor.
What makes you so sure that we are not going to face a financial crisis anytime soon? What's your guarantees?
Well, there's no guarantees, although there's always a guarantee of death and taxes. So there are ways of bailing ourselves out if we need to. But we have long maturity in terms of our debt structure. We have domestic currency dominance in our debt, which means we're in a better place. A lot of countries on the continent have foreign debt, which makes them more exposed to exchange rate volatility. And we've seen with our own debt structure that that's not the case. So we have a little bit of buffer. We have a well-capitalized and credible central bank. We have a strong central bank that is independent and very strong. And as I mentioned, we have significant other financial assets on the public sector balance sheet. So we've got the Government Employee Fund, UIF, compensation funds. And so, we are in a good position. The only problem is we do have this noose around our neck, which is this very, very expensive interest rates. Yes. We pay some of the highest interest rates in the world for a developing country. For a country with our needs, our interest rate on our debt is just too high. And put it into perspective.
Put it into perspective in terms of other countries and what we pay.
So I don't have that figure in front of me, unfortunately, but in terms of kind of comparable countries, we pay quite a lot higher. Sorry, I don't have the exact amount in front of me. Maybe one of my colleagues can give the direct figures for that. But the most important thing is that when we look at Eskom, Transnet, when we look at PRASA, they're our biggest risk at the moment, and we really need to figure out how to clean that up, how to clean up the cost of that debt, how to clean up these SOEs so that they begin to actually contribute to our economy rather than being a drag on it.
Isaac, final word to you with regards to the reserve account. And depleting reserves could mean that we reduce that cushion for future shocks. Is there no better way to address underlying fiscal issues?
Okay, before I touch on that, just to add to Tokozile's point, as a country, looking at U.S. interest rates, our risk premium is close to 5 percentage points. So we basically pay 5 percentage points above U.S. interest rates when the likes of Brazil's are lower. And the problem is our credit ratings, which are lower than those of other countries. So just to go to your question, the reserves, we have to make it pretty clear, number one here. A point I should have mentioned earlier is that in terms of the balance or the surplus in the GFECRA or the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account, South Africa is an outlier in the sense that our surplus is close to 8% of the size of our economy. When you look at our peer economies, like the ones I was talking about, Brazil, South Korea, they are below 4%, 2%, and some of the economies around the world have got negative balances in those accounts. So we were sitting on a massive surplus. So I am given comfort by the fact that the Reserve Bank is not going to liquidate our foreign exchange reserves. We will not monitor those numbers very closely. That's part of my job. The Reserve Bank releases the numbers on a monthly basis, and we've got the history, and we'll continue to monitor them. So I'm not worried about, really eroding our foreign currency liquidity.
Right. Isaac, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, let's go to our digital audience. Gerald, I'll come back to you. I'm going to switch issues in a short while with regards to the two-pot system, but I just wanted to just button up the reserve account issue. Let's go to Herminia.
Yes, firstly, I'd like to thank our guests for such an in-depth analysis. I have a question around the timing of tapping into our reserves. Is it perhaps not too early to tap into our reserves when of the 25 highly indebted nations, we only rank 15? Are we not in the long term going to compromise ourselves? Thank you.
Let's throw that to Tokozile.
I think we needed to do something. We were facing a crisis, a crisis in the sense that we needed to put some money into the system to enable us to bring down the cost of our debt. And essentially, this is what GFECRA has helped us to do. There are other options available. We could have taken other decisions around our revenue raising options, for example, through taxation. But this was probably the cleanest, most elegant way of doing it. They had to do it now because, as was mentioned, I think in the inset, around 20 cents is going to service, out of every rand, 20 cents is going to service our debt. That means we're taking money away from social services. And we're beginning to see at the in October, the medium-term budget policy statement tabled a budget that was going to result in severe cuts to social services. And what has happened by tapping into GFECRA, we've been able to release some funding, not enough, some funding to go back to social services, which is an investment. Investing in health and education, those are investments. Those are part of what helps us grow our economy. We need to invest in health, education, social protection, and so forth.
Gerald, would you have gone another route?
Look, I think the government is in a corner, and as Tokozile has mentioned, the surplus is there. Plus, we've got, the government employee pension fund, which has got a huge surplus. So the government is not stuck in terms of money, but it's the employment of that money, and it being monitored by Parliament is a good measure or a good check and balance system to ensure that we do the right thing as a country. I think it being an election year, the government was very reluctant to mess around with the current taxation, be it VAT or a wealth tax or any taxation which affects the ordinary consumer. So there are political plays as well at play. But I think, look, if the government can employ these funds in terms of being able to grow the economy, we can actually get some positives out of it. This is the equivalent of you having a lot of debt but having a lot of money in your savings account.
Yeah.
So at some point, if your income from normal employment is not sufficient, you will tap into those reserves, and that's what the government has done.
All right, let's hear from Shoaib. If you can unmute, Shoaib. Are you having any? There we
Can
go.
you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question for Topical. Just regarding tapping into GFECRA, how does that affect our investors' expectations and our country's ability to deal with future exogenous shocks?
Topical.
So, in some respects, the markets were actually calling for us to use GFECRA when looking at the overall debt balance sheet. So this has been something that has been in discussion for quite a while. And then some civil society organizations also began calling for some kind of solution to this idea, which Gerald has rightly put. We haven't run out of cash. At one point, National Treasury was making it sound as if we had run out of cash, and that's simply not true. And so tapping into GFECRA shows that we're able to make decisions and that we can ensure the cost of our debt over the long term for at least this moment. And so some in the markets are very happy about that. There was a little dip in, the rand strengthened a little bit, but it's dipped again. The markets are very fickle in their way of dealing with issues. They can be external issues that can cause problems. But the important thing here is what the colleague who's left was saying, is that they're not actually removing anything physically from the system. So this is almost like, if you can think of a pool of water and there's a little trickle of water coming out, we're just taking the water that's coming out. We haven't actually touched the swimming pool. The pool is still full. And so that should enable us. And also, we haven't touched any of our other assets that I've been talking about, the government employee pension fund. So we've managed to do this in a very sober, balanced way.
Right, as long as we don't drown in debt, I think,
exactly,
to be the extension of your analogy. Molotelo, let's go to Molotelo and then Mosebetsi.
Good evening, Blaine. Thank you so much for such an insightful engagement. So I just have a question, right? Is it not too dangerous for us to sort of tap into the emergency reserves, knowing that also our economy is not really growing at the pace it's supposed to be growing? And also understanding that we've had challenges before where money has just gone missing, And how are we going to prevent money going missing again inside that kitty that they're talking about? Because 150 billion rand it's quite a lot of money. So we need to ensure that if we're going to have that and sort of service our economy and service our debt, then there needs to be stringent measures that are put in place so that we know how the money is spent and where it's going, instead of just hearing that so much has gone missing and then there's no accountability for it. So that's just my question.
Look, I think the appropriate people to answer that is from government. We did reach out to them. They weren't available today. But maybe, Gerald, you can have a crack in terms of safeguards, measures to be put in place.
Okay, Stokozile touched on it. It's Parliament. Parliament is represented by both the ruling party and the opposition. So it's going to be difficult. Money doesn't go missing at Treasury level. Money goes missing when it actually filters down to different departments. And that's where the challenges are in terms of employment of the money. But Parliament, if they declare the money is for infrastructure, for example, the money goes to SANRAL and promotes employment, promotes economic development, that's a good thing. To some extent, even the grant payments help to keep local industry going. So there are ways in terms of the checks and balances, which is Parliament. But the greatest danger of misuse only happens when you're now at government department level, but not at National Treasury level. It's pretty well controlled at that point. And as Tokozile said, it's widening a pipe of money which is already there. So it's not us selling our national gold treasury reserves, which would be an issue, but but it's more in terms of let's use what we have and employ it wisely. Right. Government could have taken the VAT route, and they could have gone raising taxes, but they've opted to say, let's use what we already have. And remember, the South African Reserve Bank is one of the most highly respected central banks in the world, and they are trusted by investors.
Well, so Betsy, Hamina, I see your hands. You're going to need to take a quick break, though. We're asking you with regards to this reserve account, you probably better understand it now, right, from explanation of our guests. Do you agree? Is it a good idea in terms of easing the fiscal pressure, also servicing debt? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. I want to remind you about a question of the week, and we ask you, what do you make of Treasury's plan to withdraw about 150 billion from the country's contingency reserves in order to basically service debt, lower government borrowing as well? We've got a number of guests as well, digital audience raising their hands already. I want to get their take very quickly and button up these issues. Let me see, who do we have? Hamina, let's take you first. I think we lost. Oh, there we go. Mosabetsi, I'll come to you now. Let's go to Hamina.
Okay. I just had a quick comment to make about government's decision to tap into our reserves. That I do think it's a positive decision, especially that we spend 20% of our tax revenues, on servicing debt. And so once we deal with the national debt issue, we can then refocus on reinvesting into sectors that stimulate production and therefore economic growth.
All right, let's go to Motsabetsi.
Thank you very much to all the speakers for the insights that have already provided. I just have a question regarding the tapping into the national reserves. As the minister said in the speech, as highlighted by the minister in the speech, that the expected peak of debt is estimated to hit 75.3% of GDP by the fiscal year of 2025-2026. And at the same time, as one of the speakers just said, that debt service costs will absorb more than 20% of the revenue. I would just like to know, in the short run, or also maybe in the long run, how is this going to affect or going to impact or going to lead to a reduction on the debt to GDP ratio, which is actually projected to rise?
All right.
If there's going to be an impact, or if there's no impact, how can then the government or the parliament, how can parliament then use the money in such a way that it leads to a reduction of the rising debt to GDP ratio?
Tokozile?
So there's two aspects to this. The one is that it's brought down the cost because we're not doing any major additional borrowing. We're not needing to go out onto the market and borrow more at a higher rate. And so that has helped to draw down. This is the assumption that will help to draw down on the overall debt structure. The second thing is, the hope is that this injection will also free up enough space to start getting some growth going. So, really the dynamic with debt to gross domestic product, debt to GDP, the overall stuff that we make in the economy, isn't really a problem. You can have enormous amounts of debt if you have enormous amounts of growth. The problem is when you have low growth and then high interest rates and lots of debt. And so you have a situation here where they're really hoping that we can bring up growth in this interim that just gives us breathing space to get some better growth rates going that will then also hopefully over time draw down the cost of our debt, or at least reduce the threat of the impact of debt on our overall fiscus.
And how do you prevent against inflationary pressures, though?
So essentially what, sorry, I can't remember his name, Isaac. Who was speaking, Isaac, he said that what they're doing is they're sanitizing this 150 billion. And so they're giving it time and only sort of releasing it at very slow, at a slow pace. It's a little bit like, again, with the pool mechanism, it's like they're letting it trickle into one bowl, letting that fill up, and then they'll trickle it out into another bowl.
Right.
So they're trying to make sure that it doesn't, they're not releasing this 150 billion, all in one go. They're going to do it over the next 3 years, but very slowly, very carefully, to try and offset any kind of inflationary risks.
Right. Let's go back to our digital audience. Atlegang, let's take you, and then we'll take Shoaib.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask, with this specific budget in mind, and specifically the 150 billion being injected into the economy, what specific programs does the government have in place to try and create growth? Because again, Ms. Thokozile was talking about how like our interest rates, they're high, and then we need further economic growth. So are there any plans in place to try and boost, to increase the economic growth?
Yeah. I guess it's another question for government, right? But maybe, Gerald, if I can lean on you a bit, which programs do you think this should go into in terms of increasing growth?
Well, if you want an indication of where the growth might come from, you'd have to go maybe to the election manifestos of all the parties. And the one constant for all parties, regardless of ruling party or opposition, is job creation. So job creation is an economic stimulant because it allows for economic growth. So we saw nice economic growth when South Africa was hosting the 2010 World Cup. So infrastructure is a huge driver of economic growth because more people are employed, they spend more, companies make more, and it has a feel-good factor. So I think employment will be the main driver. But in terms of which sectors, I would direct it probably towards infrastructure and manufacturing. I think those are the areas in which you're likely to see a lot of the employment of capital. But for now, it's simply to manage the external debt so that we can start being able to cope. Eskom needs to come right. Transnet needs to come right. Those are key components of economic growth in South Africa.
Freight rail, energy, Eskom. Shoaib Mohammed.
So I think with regards to job creation, as we've seen from the recent budget speech, our minister spoke about a third-party access to the freight rail network by April, which will improve the transportation of minerals and manufactured products, mitigating the current delays in transportation. So I think that it is evident that we are seeing a slight or a stealthy creeping of privatization into our economy. And just reinforcing that, the government also announced that they have an agreement with a private partner to improve Pier 2 of the Durban container terminal. So I think that in a sense, that will create a lot of jobs, especially in terms of privatization of our economy.
Right. Look, the trifecta would be the ports, the rail freight and energy supply, right? If we get those consistent or persistent problems fixed up, there might be some hope. Thokozile, what do you think?
So I think there's two dynamics to this. The one is that definitely if you look at the budget and National Treasury, they're very strong to talk about infrastructure. So absolutely. We've seen that kind of redirecting of resources to capital spending, and we're seeing it at local government level and national and provincial. The only problem is that these budgets have been cut. So we haven't seen as much growth as we would like to. And in fact, fixed capital investment by government has gone down over time, and we've also seen it going down in terms of the private sector. So we've got an overall investment in infrastructure going down, which is partly the reason why we have this low growth. We want to have a real, both by the private and the public sector, investing in infrastructure and in good green infrastructure. So schools, hospitals, clinics, rail, bus, all of that we want to see, and Eskom, we want to see it sorted out as well. The second thing is this question around in the speech and in the budget review, which is a very important budget document to read if you haven't read it. It comes with the budget. It's tabled at the same time. The budget review talks about public-private partnerships, and we must be very, very careful about what kinds of public-private partnerships in what areas, because it's been shown globally that public-private partnerships actually end up being more expensive, more corruption prone, and our SOE history has shown us what PPPs mean. It does mean a threat to the fiscus, because money, as we mentioned earlier, can easily disappear. So we have to be very, very cautious around talking about public-private partnerships,
right.
And making sure that there are good checks and balances, which means that we need to support our security cluster. And so we've seen in the last little while some investment in building up our NPA, building up the South African Revenue Service, because we actually lose billions of rands in illicit financial flows every year, and some of it is quite licit. It's just not ethical. Right. And so the bigger picture of the budget is absolutely critical. So the 150 billion that everyone's talking about, we're talking about an over 1.5 to 2 trillion rand budget. And so we have to focus on the real big numbers and where they're going.
All right. Thokozile, thank you very much indeed for that explanation. I just want to shift gears a bit and focus on something called the two-pot system. Look, Control, if you have that slide, please put it up. We just want to give the viewers a sense of what we're talking about. Look, high interest rates, general cost of living, people looking for some breathing space, Gerald. So we have the savings pot, and then we have the retirement pot. In layman's terms, how does it work?
In layman's terms, when you're saving for retirement currently, you cannot touch that money until you reach retirement age in South Africa, which is 55. Unless you're disabled or unless you leave the country, that money is locked and it's governed by an act of parliament. Now, what's going to happen is that with the two-pot system, they're going to change the rules slightly. They're going to say, as a once-off, everyone can tap into whatever they have in their retirement savings. That amount has still not been finalized. And then going forward with future contributions, 1/3 of your contributions will go into the retirement savings pot, which you can access from time to time, whilst the 2/3 will essentially be governed by the same rules which we have now, which is wait until you retire at age of 55. So that's what the two-pot system is really saying. Now, although it's been mooted to be in September, a lot of the things are still not clear. How much can we access now? Labour wants to access a percentage of the pot, whilst government wants to determine a fixed amount. So I've heard 20,000, 25,000. People are saying it's too little. So a lot of the actual dynamics are not there yet. Also, outside the Pension Funds Act, you have state-owned entities which have specific acts which apply to their own pension funds, which need to be aligned to the new two-pot system. So will it happen on time? We hope so. But we're hoping that consumers are educated enough to be ready to make the right decision when September comes around.
I just want to understand it a bit. And I understand that you can only withdraw, is it once every tax year, right?
Yes, they want you to be able to withdraw once every tax year, but for now, because with pension funds, you can't apply the act retrospectively. Yes. They're going to say, for now, everyone will get an opportunity to dip in once. Right. And then going forward, you can only access 1/3 as your savings component. And depending on how much you're saving for retirement, it could be much or it could be very little, because traditionally a lot of South Africans don't save that much for retirement. So, but it would be something which also drives economic growth. So as part of our other conversation, it'll be a nice opportunity to see a glut of money coming into the system. And yes, whether people buy TVs and cars or pay off their debt, it's all adds to economic activity.
Well, let's talk a bit about that in terms of the use of this money. What's your advice in terms of what is unnecessary withdrawals, what is necessary? What sort of caveats are you?
Look, I think, this also borders around allowing people their constitutional right of choice. If you want to buy cabbages for your cattle and have a feast for them, it's up to you. If you want to buy a TV, it's up to you. But remember, you are using money which was meant for retirement. The right advice would be use the money on something which will help to stimulate economic activity in your own personal economy. So rather build an extra room at the back of your house so that you can put a tenant, because at least you can get rental income. So it's exactly the same conversation we are having at government level, but you're taking it down to your own personal level in terms of your own household. How can I use this extra money I have so that it makes sense? Channeling into debt, it's great for private companies. And I think that's also what Thokozile was touching upon you touched upon, saying private-public partnerships. Government is not broke, but private sector has much more money than government sitting doing nothing.
Right.
We need to stimulate that as well.
Before I get to Thokozile's point, what about the tax implications here?
Obviously, there will be a tax implication, which again is good news for SARS. There will be a tax implication because anytime you tap into that retirement savings, they will use the retirement tax tables to calculate on your withdrawal. Labour is trying to make it tax-free, but we will see who wins the argument between government and Labour.
Thokozile, good idea, bad idea?
It's a difficult idea because, in some respects, many countries have really been able to grow strongly because they've had strong domestic savings. And so this can undermine our domestic savings to a certain extent. And it's partly why I think Treasury has been so hesitant in pushing this through. But at the same time, we have some of the highest unemployment rates in the world. We know about black tax. So people are needing cash. And do we want to force people into higher indebtedness, or do we want to enable them to tap a pot of money that is theirs that they can then use for what is needed? So it's also about avoiding the mashonistas, So it's a huge, it's a real challenge and balance, and something that I think in terms of SARS, yes, they're definitely waiting to see how much they'll be able to make. There was a presentation I attended, and they are beginning to do the numbers on what they'll make, what they're expecting to make out of this new reform.
All right, let's go to our digital audience. Hands up there. Shoaib Mohammed.
This question is for Thokozile. Do you think that in the short term, we'll see some growth in the economy, given that people will have access to some of their savings? So just a short-term boost in consumption, stimulating the economy?
I'm seeing Gerald nodding. Yes, absolutely. There should be some kind of boost to the system. Ideally, we want to see it, as you were saying, we want to see that money going towards fixed assets, that build local economies. So building a room on, like he mentioned. So to get people active and enabling them to develop in ways that they see best. So we don't want to prescribe. Absolutely not. People have their absolute constitutional right to decide what they do with their money. But it is hoped that it'll be done in a way that drives economic growth.
Gerald, what if you move jobs? We know that you'll have access to the saving pot, but what about that retirement pot? Is it only for retirement?
Yes, I think it applies to your retirement savings, be it under the Pension and Provident Fund Act or the Pension Funds Act, which are actually also going to be aligned together in terms of going forward. So I think it's a positive development. Any consumption spending is good for the economy. Consumption is good for the economy because it drives growth. Growth drives employment. Employment drives all the good things. So if we can use that opportunity of those funds, it will definitely benefit the economy, even on a once-off basis. But most definitely, X number of billions being spent come September will definitely benefit a very sluggish economy, which needs some stimulus to just keep going. I think one of the things about South Africa is we seem to be a sentiment-driven country, be it at personal level. If people are not happy, they don't spend. And we are going into that period where a lot of people have so many matatas, so many problems, and a bit of that feel-good factor will definitely allow growth to start happening again. So I'm all in favor. I just feel that financial education is, however, key to rather drive consumers towards consumption, which can generate more economic growth versus consumption, which leads to dead money.
I've got space for just one more question. So fastest finger first, sound like a game show host. Motsobetsi, let's take you. If you can unmute. There we go.
Thank you. One of the key targets set up in Chapter 3 of the National Development Plan was for the economy to achieve an annual growth rate of 5.4%. However, the reality has been quite different, given the fact that we only now have 6 years left before the expiration, perhaps, of the NDP. And growth has been slower than what it was expected to be, with between 2013 and 2023, a compounded annual growth rate was 1.8%, and this slowed down even further to 0.2 between 2018 and 2023, largely due to the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would just like to know, what is going to be the impact of this stimulation packages? Perhaps are we going to see maybe a little bit of reaching that 5.4% of the projected annual growth rate, but maybe within the next 6 years before the NDP comes to an end?
Thokozile, I'm going to test you in 30 seconds if you can answer that question.
Sure. Very quickly, I think there's both domestic and international dynamics to understanding growth. And we've seen that some of the pressure that we've been placed on, because we're an open economy, we're quite at the mercy of the whims of the markets, of the international markets. And so I think we could see some improvement in growth. But it's my personal professional opinion, we are not likely to see a vast improvement until we really deal with our structural issues and our domestic issues like Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, and so forth.
100%. Thokozile, Gerald, thank you very much indeed. Value added, no doubt, a benefit for the audience, digital audience as well. Thank you so much for your contributions. I hope we got a better understanding of what that budget was all about. Appreciate your time. All right, before we go, here's my take. But first, let me tee it up for you. Take a listen.
Madam Speaker, according to two prominent economists, Alberto Alsenia and Danny Rodrigues, they had this observation to say, and I quote, "A crude distinction between economics and politics would be that economics is concerned with expanding the pie, while politics is about distributing it."
The national pie, what ingredients do we need to enrich this pie? And should we be looking at other ways of stirring these ingredients? The global growth forecast in 2025 from 3.1% this year to 3.2%. It's a moderate improvement. In South Africa, growth is projected to average around 1.6% between this year and 2026. But there's risk, right? And you heard what our guest was saying as well. It's our ports, our freight rail, our energy supply, among others. If we fix these persistent constraints, then it might add a bit of more steak than kidney, right? To that national pie. We need to have clear eyes about viable options. And it looks like a all hands on deck kind of job. So the question is, will this country come together around the promise of what it can be? It's not about having more money than sense. It's about being sensible with the money you do have. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. Oli will be with you for the next hour. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.